Good afternoon. We are Team Overhaul, and we are here to talk about Maritime Research Center. Maritime Research Center is a fictitious name of a company that we had to choose because the government agency that we had used originally, I got into a little bit of complications with. So I'll get into that a little bit later. But the Maritime Research Center, also known as MRC, is moving from a research-based lab to a project management center. This project management center will review and work with the United States sea bottom trawler. So what our group did was we went out to the center, MRC, and we did an organizational IQ survey. 144 questions on 4 separate areas out of Rude Weimer's textbook that we're reviewing in our class. So our group took those results. Each person had its own individual section. Out of those sections, we gathered some information, whether it would be good or bad, and then we are going to present our information to you guys in a roundtable discussion. We wanted to be a little bit entertaining in our results and make sure that we could keep everybody's attention. For any additional information that we do not cover in our presentation, we have our paper, obviously, that you guys are more welcome to dig into a little bit more, and if you have any questions about anything that's presented, please feel free to contact us. So we'll present our recommendations, we'll go through the problems, and it'll be a little bit Q&A session. Just to tag on to something that Kai's going to touch on a little bit towards the end of the project, we ran into some lessons learned and also some problems. The lessons learned was if you are to ever go to a government agency and survey any of the employees, you must get prior permission. This prior permission I did not ask for, since I was asking some friends and coworkers to kind of help me out with the class, and everything worked fine until I presented the information that we had gathered from our organizational survey to our management team to kind of see if we were on the right track. They kind of passed it on to the union to the lawyers, and from that point it was I got called in to see if there was possibility for termination and also some legal action. So that is why we are using the MRC instead of my actual workplace. Also, another kind of speed bump we had is right after we decided to use my project, my actual work location, government furlough and government shutdown happened, and doors were closed to my lab. Also, the website that we were going to use to gather some of our information was also shut down. So when teammates went to actually gather information, there was nothing there. And it was kind of a speed bump, but we prevailed, we pushed through, and we are proud to present our following presentation. And thank you for watching.
Well, Bart, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm sorry that you can't make it to our meeting that we're having today. This is what we call a good to great meeting. This is allowing us to kind of have a post-mortem on our project. We get to ask each of the members what went well, what are some things that we do to change, and to talk about the situation, look at what the problem statement was. We can talk about some of the recommendations we've had, and then certainly to go with some of the lessons learned, because in this project we had some surprises. And some of them were good, some of them were not so good. But what I'd like to do is for us to just kind of go through some of the questions. We're just going to talk amongst ourselves and explore really what this project means to us and maybe what the client will be able to get from it. So with that, we can go ahead and start with the experiential section. Our project is broken up into 4 different groups following what the textbook has for organizational IQ. And so each of the 4 consultants took that section, and we became the subject matter expert in that area. We did the surveys. We got the survey results back, analyzed those independent, so nobody knew what the results were for anybody else's survey, and we came to our own independent conclusions and recommendations. And so what'll be interesting is to see how did our answers differ. So with that, let's talk about the experiential IQ.
Okay, Kai. And as you know, Kai is going to be referencing Bart's section with the experiential IQ. And Bart kind of discussed some of the strengths of the MRC. One of those was the employee retention. Can you kind of elaborate a little bit on the strengths and weaknesses of the employee retention?
Sure. With the employee retention that they had at the MRC, it was considered one of the high points. The employees, they were comfortable there. They felt that they were useful and needed. But we started to see some evidence of some other problems inside the organization where that retention was turning into tenure. And the organization, as a research organization, which values the knowledge base of those researchers, which are highly skilled and sought after individuals, especially for a maritime operation like this, which is very specialized. Well, what they found is that retention was leading to entitlement, that it was leading to the groups developing silos and fiefdoms. And oh no, if you want to know anything about this type of submersible, you're going to have to come to me, and then I will dispense the knowledge accordingly. Well, that would be great as a research organization, but what is a real strength on one hand became a real weakness later on, because you couldn't get anything done otherwise. And so it became a bottleneck. And that starts to show up throughout the survey, where you have employee retention, which is a good thing, taken to an extreme, could actually become a weakness.
Having the loyalty, and then all of a sudden the loyalty kind of turning itself on you.
Right.
Is in essence is what you had seen.
And that is what Bart's section was alluding to, that there's needing to have room for up and comers, and there's no parking spot for them. Needing to take people who want to learn more about management, there's not a management track within the organization. Well, those things are going to have to be changed if the organization is going to migrate from pure research into professional project management.
And we've talked a lot in class about knowledge management, which I think is kind of what you're talking about, knowledge management and sharing. How do you think the MRC should deal with this?
Well, in Bart's section, because Bart actually did the on-site interviews and spoke with a number of the managers and support staff and is familiar with what they're doing with knowledge management. The neat thing is they do have a knowledge management system. The problem that they're running into is that it is designed as a silo for knowledge about particular research projects. It's not cross-referenced with project management. So the process of managing something is not documented. If you want to know, what is the undersea pressure at such and such depth, certainly they have that information.
Sure.
Lots of
finding
industry.
it, that was the other thing,
But
right? 'Cause
finding
everyone
it-
can put it in their own way, and it doesn't necessarily, it's not searchable by everyone.
Right, it's not. We say it's not user friendly. It's user hostile. And what he discovered is that although they're making strides in that area, it's not enough to be able to quickly and effectively communicate to other people in the organization, especially people outside of the organization.
Right.
Very interesting. Going into the contextual IQ survey, we kind of mentioned already some disparities. What we were originally thinking was going to take place, or the knowledge we received from the surveys. What were some of the disparities that you saw within this section?
Well, when we started this project, we picked up the organizational IQ framework, and we weren't really quite sure what was going to happen with that.
Right.
I mean, there are all sorts of tools that are out there that we've chosen to use in this project. We did, the Boston Consulting Group's SWOT analysis, and we, used the survey results that have Likert scales, and we did the analysis of that, and we have heat maps on what that looks like. But following this framework, we weren't really sure that the answers were going to reflect fairly what's really going on with the enterprise that we're studying. So when we started to get some of our feedback back, and we realized that it was inconsistent, that maybe we have a problem on our hands. And in the section that I worked on, which is the contextual IQ, an area where this shows up is leadership and vision, strong leadership and vision. And this is something that the organization scored highly on. It was consistent across all the survey results. So we thought, okay, that would work. However, we started to look at project management and scored very low.
Sure.
Well, that's a problem. And how can you have both those coexist? And what we started to realize is that this is a tale of two organizations. It's a tale of two cities. You have within the same building a company that at one time used to be a premier research organization, in which case all of their answers were perfectly legitimate.
Sure.
And then you have the same organization that is now being projected as a project management company, and their answers are totally legitimate. And so they are both coexisting. This is a company that's in transition. And so we are seeing that in the survey results. And that was confirmed with the on-site interviews that we had with management when we prepared our results for them. And their management team looked at that and said, those results are spot on. That's really what we're dealing with.
Wow.
So it was neat to see that the instrument that we used in this project really did detect that discrepancy.
I agree. And you talked about in Bart's section about up-and-comers and making room for them. Did you have something similar in the experiential and how, or sorry, in contextual, and how is it different than Bart's?
One of the things that we saw in ours is that we had a need for project management. I mean, this is a company that is billing itself as a project management firm and certainly has a wealth of knowledge and research and development in that area, in the technical side of it. But what it didn't have is project managers, as I mentioned earlier. So an opportunity that, and one of the recommendations that we have is that they ought to be doing two things. One, bring in fresh outside professional project management because they scored very low on professional certifications for project management.
Sure.
The other thing would be, let's look at creating tracks that are both management track and the technical track, as well as looking at putting together incentives with the Human Resources Department that would say, we want you to learn project management, we're going to incentivize you to develop that knowledge base to help us as we progress into a project management firm. And so those were some of the recommendations that showed up not only in my section, but I think in other sections as well.
So get the right people in the right seats on the bus.
Yes, the right people need to be on the right seats on the bus, but not all the seats have to be filled.
Right.
That's a good point.
I
So
agree.
that's good. So in the confidential IQ section, we had mentioned that I had some disconnects in mine,
Right.
where I really was expecting a certain answer and I got a totally different answer.
Right.
Did you have any sort of examples where that happened with you?
Absolutely. And the key area we scored the highest was smart decision making. This scored off the charts for me, which on the other side, it was a lack of decision makers. So here you have these employees receiving all this knowledge and the ability to carry on these projects with the smart decision making, yet they didn't have the management in place or the decision makers in place to continue these projects forward. So in essence, you were getting these bottlenecks where you didn't have a nice flow and a conducive flow to get the project completed.
So
Interesting.
is that kind of like with a research organization? I could expect that you'd have highly skilled engineers that when you need a technical answer, you're going to get a very sophisticated, well thought out. This is the answer that you need. But this isn't going to always be that research company. So is it really that when we do get answers, they're great answers. We just aren't able to get our answers fast enough.
And that was the consensus amongst the group. The answers weren't coming fast enough. It's taking X amount of time where it should be a quick and simple process.
And not necessarily knowing who is supposed to be giving that answer.
And that's the other thing. I mean, there are a lot of layers involved. No one's knowing who's on first, so to speak, and therefore they're not sure who to look for with getting the right answer or getting the correct answer to move on down the road. So, yeah, again, causing a bottleneck, causing some frustration amongst the employees.
Do you think HR could come in on that and help the MRC grow in that area?
That was another thing that we touched on within our confidential survey, asking about the incentive. And I think that's something that permeates, it was a sort of a theme amongst everybody's sections. There wasn't really a good incentive base in place. And I think that's what's causing some of the bottlenecks, so to speak, as we discussed earlier. I think if there was a more incentivizing opportunity for these employees, not only just management, but the employees in general, I think these projects would possibly move a lot faster.
And
I think decisions would be made a little more quickly.
I think Bart's section even talks about giving people bonuses for how long they've been there. Longevity bonus, which to me is almost counterproductive. You don't want someone to dig their heels in and hoard their knowledge and keep all the information on their desk.
Right.
You want someone who's going to share and bring people up. which is actually another possibility for an incentive is you helped someone below you get to your level, you get a bonus, you get an incentive.
And the incentives isn't just, hey, we're gonna incentivize you to get this project done fast.
Right.
But it's going to be effective. It's going to be cost effective, and it's going to be rewarding for the organization as a whole. So collectively, it would be a good win-win for the whole project.
You know, that's interesting because in our class, the professor talked about sources of power within an organization. And one of those sources of power was kind of the asymmetric information. I know more than you do, therefore I am powerful.
Right.
Or I control this area and it's important, and as long as I control it, I'm powerful, and so you have to come to me. And what we're seeing is that, you know, the organizational chart for this organization is getting ready to change. The silos that used to make perfect sense for research were going to have to be dismantled and put back together again to where these teams are truly functional and multidisciplinary teams. And you can see how they would have trouble. You can see how these results are showing up. So that's great that we caught that in that area and realized that it's going to permeate everything.
Moving on to emotional IQ, Rebecca. Communication is such an important component. Can you tell us a little bit about the strengths and weaknesses of this area and what you noticed?
Sure. I was happy to see that one of the strengths in this area is that people feel connected. They feel like they belong. They feel like they have the information they need to do their jobs. When it falls short is when there are change in business practices or change in a business unit, they don't feel that they're getting that information. It makes them feel a little, in fact, uncertain was the word in there that just really rang out to me. So I mentioned for MRC some of the common barriers that we see to communication. One is allowing or putting information out on a mass media site of some way without really checking to see if employees saw it, without knowing if they understood it. So I mentioned possibly letting them know that the information's coming, and then checking back a little while later and saying, did you see it? Did you understand it? Maybe even calling everyone together. Give them a treat. You know, give them a reason to sit down there and talk about it again and ask questions. There are people that are going to go to that meeting and then go back and read.
Sure.
But they read it and they start to understand it.
So in your section, when you talked about the emotional IQ, which you really gravitated toward that. I mean, your section has a lot of real world experience backing up that, and it shows in the final report that these aren't just ideas that you read in a book. You've lived it, and you've seen what works and what doesn't work. And I guess one of the examples of what doesn't work is to keep everybody in the dark.
Right.
And since the MRC is focusing on retention, and that really is the business that they're in, is all the space between everybody's ears. You know, they make nothing. It's all gray matter.
Sure.
You can't afford to have that gray matter walking out the door.
It's scary. It's scary to be on uncertain ground.
Wow.
There are other barriers include don't give too much information all at once. You know, you gotta pick your audience and pick the message for that audience. Because if I stand up here and tell financial information to my petroleum engineers, it's going to go in one ear and out the other. They don't care, and beyond that, they can't use it. So figure out who you want to talk to and what message, or better yet, figure out what message you want to give and who you need to give it to. Another mistake I think a lot of us do, and we don't realize it until we're in mixed company, is we use jargon. We use watchwords that I understand in my day and everyone on my floor might understand, but if I go to another floor or another company or another industry, they don't understand what I'm talking about. So be careful not to use those. When you're talking to, for instance, when management is talking to a section that works below them, they may not have the same vocabulary that you have. So simplify. Use real world words that are in Webster's and that are easily understood, and be sure not to use too many nonverbal clues. It's very confusing for someone who doesn't know the speaker to try and translate what the eye roll means, what the sarcastic voice means, what I don't know if you're really making a joke or if you're angry about your topic. So these are things to avoid.
So if what we're seeing at the MRC is that they're probably going to deconstruct teams and reconstruct them, chances are they're going to be in mixed company more often than not until they reassimilate those teams and everybody develops a rapport. So these aren't just good suggestions for whenever a new employee comes in. These are suggestions that they should be using today with their people.
Absolutely.
And especially if we're seeing these silos, when you come knocking on the silo next door saying, I need you to do something for me, if they had already had some of these recommendations in place, that approach would have been much easier and much more effective.
It would have been a lot more fluid. Everybody be willing to help out instead of keeping it to themselves.
Certainly.
I agree.
So-
Or not understand, or I might not even know who to go to
Right.
if it hasn't been, if my team has not been explained to me thoroughly, and I don't know who my lead is, and I don't know if I need my financial information, which door do I knock on?
So the other three groups, the other three sections that we did, we all had surprises. We all thought we had a pretty good beat on what these answers were going to be because we had early interviews and we had an understanding, some background history of this thing that we should be seeing answers like this, and we were all surprised. Did you have something like that in your section? If so, what was it?
I did. I had a big one. To me, the biggest one, but I could be partial. When employees were asked if large changes in the business, especially the business processes, are they disseminated correctly to the employee, and do they think their managers understand what's going on? And most of them said no. More than half answered no.
Wow.
Well, that's almost a failing grade.
That's exactly that. That one really blew me away. That you have employees that are in the midst of exactly what that question is talking about, and they don't know what to do. They're just not sure. So I talked about incentives as well.
Sure.
That was a big one, and that's in sharing that knowledge. And I mentioned that earlier. Not only getting your job done and doing it on time and doing it well, but also sharing your knowledge and helping someone else get to where you are.
Absolutely.
I think that's incredibly important.
Well, it is interesting that we all had our share of aha moments when we went through this, and yet they all seem to point to similar things. We're looking at, top grading the employees. We're looking at bringing HR in. We're looking at organizational change. We're looking at communication, followed by more communication. That all of this is really what you would expect that would need to happen with the organization that's undergoing the type of dramatic change that they're doing.
Right.
And that is probably one of the neat surprises that we had overall, is that 4 different independent perspectives come to a similar conclusion. And we have to give some kudos to the program and to the organizational IQ methodology, because it did sense that for us. And so that's great. And I think you guys all did a wonderful job on your sections. Bart worked very hard to get all his put together and overcoming some unforeseen issues with the government shutdown.
Couple obstacles. Yeah,
And not being allowed into the facility while the government was shut down, and yet we were able to prevail, and we've got our assignment completed and turned in on time. So with that, you get an idea of the situation that we were faced, the problems that we addressed, recommendations that we put together, and we've talked a little bit about the lessons learned on this project. So with that, we wish the other teams the best, and we look forward to watching their presentation online.